Yes. And also, just so you all know, there's no AI transcription of this, and I'm recording to my local machine and not to the internet. This is not being live streamed um, at this time. So let me share my screen. Let's see if you all can see that. Share. Can you all see the PowerPoint? Everyone, yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I cannot see the chat while I have the PowerPoint open. So if you have something in the chat, Logan, just interrupt me or anything else. But I have a short presentation and then we'll get into a significant question and answer portion and really just talk amongst ourselves also about sort of some things that we can do. My name is B. Ray Perryman. I use she, her pronouns. I am the communications director here at the ACLU of Connecticut. I am originally from Waco, Texas, but have worked in DC and in journalism in policy and in journalism for a long time. And so I love working at the ACLU because we are nationwide. But I've landed in Connecticut as of May, and I really enjoy the state here, the advocacy community like you all, and am really enjoying being sort of the education and communications person because I get to interface with people just like you. Also with us is Logan Marshall, our director of philanthropy. He has been at the ACLU of Connecticut, I think over a year, about a year and a half or so. And he came from the ACLU of Arizona. So we both have a perspective of this, especially on the immigration issue, that it's just near and dear to our hearts. And I know it is to everyone else in this room. So I do have a bit of a script to go through, but I will tell you, I spent my day in Danbury with the Attorney General, the Mayor of Danbury, Senator Julie Kushner, and the Danbury Police Department, as well as the immigrant community, members of the Board of Education. It was a really great a gathering that we had there where we talked about a lot of these things. And as you, I'm sure every day is different and every day will be different, especially through like the first 100 days or so. So on the way back, driving from Danbury to Hartford, I also did a training with ACLU National on mass deportations, where we got very granular about some of our litigation and advocacy strategies. So I'm going to try to incorporate some of that new information as I have it. But the guides and the things that we will provide you today will be changing prior to January 20th and then soon after. However, this is a good sort of primer that we're going to get started. And we will be focusing on immigration today, but we will also, I want to share with you sort of what the ACLU is doing generally. So this is planning for 2025, and this is for us. So the first thing I want to do is I want to thank Jill for having us and thank you all for being here. It's nice to see everyone's faces and to hear from you all. I hope that this will be good, a good conversation for everyone. But what I wanted to start with sort of in our agenda today is starting like, where are we right now? What are we anticipating, federal, state, and local governments? And then talk about how the ACLU and the ACLU of Connecticut here in the state is meeting this moment. And then also like what you can do. And then we'll move into question and answer and just sort of have a conversation. So I want to be very clear that there's sort of four things going on, and we need to be paying attention to all of them. First is if you watch the news, like all of us do every day, you're likely hearing a lot about the federal government. So from now until inauguration, you will hear more about Trump's cabinet picks and lots of policies that the president-elect has promised on in his campaign and how he's planning to enact those as soon as he gets in office. From January 20th until the end of April, that's the first 100 days. During that time, you will see a lot of tone setting. You will see cabinet confirmations. You will see sort of the staff taking shape and what that looks like. And unfortunately, especially for our LGBTQIA communities and our immigrant communities, I think that tone setting is going to be one of shock and awe, and one that's very negative and potentially very scary. But that's why we're here today to make it less so. Next, you'll have the state government, right? And that is where what's happening currently in the state government is we've met with, I was in the meetings, we've met with the governor's staff, we've met with the lieutenant governor and her staff, we've met with the attorney general and our policy director is meeting with legislative leadership like right now, and has before this. And we're meeting with, when the legislature starts, January 8th, we'll be starting to meet with those committees just that first week. Right now, what's happening, so we get to do civil rights and liberties all day, but the governor, has a government to run. So he and his staff are trying to do these prophylactic measures where they shore up any funding that the Biden administration can provide now from agencies that are currently fully staffed, fully funded, and have any sort of grant funding opportunities. The legislative session in Connecticut begins January 8th. I was hoping my dog would not bark. We'll see what happens. And what we need to be watching for is funding and that rhetoric of having to use federal funds that have these funding conditions attached. The next thing that we need to be looking at is our local government, which is what I was doing today in Danbury. We will need to be looking at what protective measures our governments are taking for not only immigrants, but for healthcare and for our LGBTQIA plus folks. We will need to be taking the temperature of our elected officials in municipalities and in the state. We will also need to be taking the temperature of people like law enforcement, also our neighbors, our faith communities, things like that. What's happening in municipalities sort of across the state that I love. Sorry about my dog. I'm trying to ply him with treats and see what happens. But there are many coalitions and networks that have already sort of been in place since Trump won, but that are growing and are much more strategic as we move into the sort of the 47 administration. That includes call trees for things like immigration defense lawyers, and that includes sort of these networks that I think someone was talking about before about like making sure that people have access to reproductive medications and treatments. And those sort of things are happening on a municipal level and on a state level. The ACLU convenes people like that nationally, these coalitions of advocates. We have an integrated advocacy model I'll go over in a moment. And that is what we are doing nationally on the state level. And then today I witnessed it on the municipal level. And that was the second meeting of that type that I've been in. I've been in one in New Haven as well. So that's the sort of three prongs of government that we're seeing right now, and then what we think we're going to see in January 20th. I don't want to be negative, but I would not expect sunshine and rainbows after January 20th. I think there will be, especially on the federal level, quite a few things that are disturbing to think about and to see and to consider when we are talking about our communities and neighbors. The fourth thing, and this is the thing that I love that I get to do here at the ACLU in Connecticut, is we are focused on civil society. So one of the things that we know is that, oh, can I go back? There we go. One of the things that we know is that in more authoritarian governments and times where the federal government of a country is not really acting and comporting itself to the will of the people or to democratic norms, is that if folks decide that they are going to act as if they are part of a society and part of a community and not just atomized consumers of news and information or misinformation, as it were. If people really come together, which is what we're gratefully seeing on the state, local, federal level, and in groups just like this, right? We know that that is a great way for people to push back against these shifting societal norms, right? Like what we don't want is for all of the sudden there to be a bunch of terrible policies that most people are okay with because they haven't been in community with their towns and with their cities and counties and states. So the thing about civil society is these are non-governmental people that sort of decide to act and comport themselves, in alignment with their values and in alignment with democratic norms. That's very important to us right now at the ACLU, and I think that will be very important to our communities going forward. And that starts with you. The number one sort of practical thing that I can tell you is to please write down your values, share them, put them on the refrigerator, share them with the people in this room, share them with your family and friends. They don't have to be the same as your family and friends, right? Everybody can have their own sort of set of values, but you need to make sure that you know what you will and won't put up with. We are likely to see some disturbing things throughout the country and potentially in our own communities. And, everyone is tired, everyone has work or other, family commitments, medical issues, things like that. And so we need to make sure that you know exactly what your bright line is and what will get you, what will spur you into action and what kind of action that looks like. That happens in community groups like this one. Making sure that you stay in communication is key. And one of the things we're working on the municipal level and even the state level in the advocacy community is these phone trees, making sure that groups just like this, where you have everyone's number, you have you have the ability to get in touch with people, and you've sort of identified a safe group of people that cares about an issue that's going to stand up for these values. We see civil society is also very important in advocacy organizations, coalitioning, and networking. And we are proud at the ACLU of Connecticut to say that we are one of many strong nonprofits and advocacy organizations in the state. And we have emerged as one of the leaders, and we are lucky to be sometimes conveners of groups for government relations and other types of advocacy on the issues that you all care the most about. So that is sort of if you take away one thing from this, it would be to know that you are not powerless. You are a member of a civil society of decent people, regardless of what the federal government is mirroring back to you. So sorry, my dogs are barking. I'm working on it. And in that vein, I want you to look at this map here. It's from sea to shining sea, with Hartford and Washington, D.C. highlighted here. The ACLU is a federated organization. We have 2,200 staff in 50 states on the federal level in Puerto Rico, Guam, and we have a lawyer in Guantanamo because everyone deserves to have a lawyer. And the staff in Connecticut, we were 6 when we started this work in Trump 1. And we are now a staff of 17. So we're very proud that we have grown and that we have grown strategically and in smart ways. And that is in no small part due to Mr. Logan Marshall that's here in the room with us today. We really take seriously how we sustainably grow. And he is a big part of that. And what we also do is this integrated advocacy model. So you will see the ACLU in the courts, that is Supreme Court, federal courts, and state courts. We do it all. You will see the ACLU in the legislature and lobbying the governors. Today, I did that in my capacity as sort of a policy organizer with the Attorney General and the Mayor of Danbury. You will see our smart justice leaders and our policy team lobbying in the legislature almost every day of the session. We have policy priorities that are values-based. We'll go over here in this presentation in a bit. And then we have the fun work that I get to do, which is this coalitioning work, where we convene groups and people together that have aligned values and aligned either policy priorities or goals for civil rights and liberties generally. We do a good bit in the ACLU of Connecticut. We do a good bit of power building with other groups because maybe they don't have, the network that we have or the resources we have. And we really work with they're called community-centered fundraising principles. And we make sure that we are power building with our resources, and that is monetary and also with sort of our expertise. And then we also get to do, which is my job, is the information, education, communicating these things out to the public, and then also mobilization, which comes in the form of protesting and showing up when we needed. We are having, for example, a rally at the courthouse on Friday, and because we are intervening in a case where justice was not served, and we do that in coalition as part of our integrated advocacy model. The next thing. So that's sort of the large scale overview of the ACLU and the ACLU of Connecticut. what we did at the ACLU of Connecticut prior to the election was game out 28 different scenarios that we might see. Unfortunately, as you all I'm sure know, we are in the worst case scenario, but we did that by putting out a memo where we looked at things like Project 2025 priorities and Trump priorities. We also gamed out a Harris win and some election safeguarding scenarios. We really covered our bases as a staff. It was a really great moment coming together as our staff. And so we have this available on our website for you to see. This was debuted in September, and we are updating it with our Firewalls for Freedom work, which is what we've done since the election. So that is sort of the pre-election strategy. That's the overview, the pre-election strategy. And then now I'll start with what we're doing sort of since the election. Are there any questions so far? Everyone good?
I think it's good, B. And also, when your dog barks, we can't hear it because Zoom suppresses it. So you're having to listen to the
Oh,
bark.
thank
I
goodness.
can't hear
He's
it.
barked like 4 times. I really thought I was being obstructed here. Oh, fabulous. Oh, that makes me so happy. Well, wonderful. Well, free speech for everyone, even for the puppies.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will now move into, since the election, the ACLU nationally and the ACLU of Connecticut has put out 100 pages of policy guidance. It is not publicly available yet. We do have a website that shares some of it. It's up in the corner of your screen there, acluct.org/47. I think Logan will probably share that in the chat. And we are updating those firewalls for freedom as they become publicly available. What they are is an overview of our policy priorities, which we're about to sort of to run through, but you know exactly what they are. It's exactly the same things you all are worried about. And we've provided these documents. There is draft legislation. There is memos about, there are, I think, half a dozen easily editable statutes that are already on the books in Connecticut. So we don't have to have a lot of political will. These are things that can be edited to increase people's civil rights, and they have to do with gender affirming care and reproductive health care, and also shoring up marriage rights. And that not only includes same-sex marriage, but yes, even interracial marriage. We are to that point where we are trying to shore up all of the rights that we can in Connecticut, and we have provided that guidance to our elected officials. The governor has that guidance. The lieutenant governor has that guidance. The attorney general has that guidance. Gary Winfield has that guidance, and the rest of the legislative leadership as well. When the leadership convenes in early January, we will likely be providing that to some committee members as well. And what that does is lay out our priorities that are our values-based sort of action items. And we have done the work for them. We have done the case law. We have drafted there's a draft executive order declaring a civil rights emergency. I don't think that the governor will likely sort of put that in place, but he does have it. He can absolutely copy and paste it and sign it and make it so if he so chooses. So that is what the ACLU has done in a very forceful way since the election, because we know that this is the best of times for the next little bit here, for at least the next 150 days. And so the issues of the day that are in the firewalls for freedom are reproductive justice. And so that is abortion care, pregnancy care, fertility care. We include gender affirming care in that as well. We have shield laws on the books in Connecticut, and we are hoping to shore those up and make them even stronger and add gender affirming care to them. We are currently drafting legislation with the Attorney General's office that we will try, is sort of the attempt to shore up some of these shield laws. We know data privacy is going to be, it's one of the biggest issues that we get in the immigration space as well, when people try to access their social safety net. And so we definitely see the data privacy is going to be an issue for patients, providers, and we are putting pressure on the governor to sort of make sure that government agencies are not selling your healthcare data or otherwise putting your healthcare data at risk to, I don't know, red state governors that think that they can look across state lines, things like that. So We have also partnered with Repro Equity Now, the AG in our state, and also the Attorney General in Massachusetts, and several Connecticut and Massachusetts law firms to open an abortion legal hotline that is available in 20 languages. And is staffed 24 hours a day, except for Christmas Eve through the 2nd of January. I do think the hotline will be taking some time off, but that is available to people. I encourage you to put that number in your phone and share it out and make sure that everyone that you know has that number and that you utilize it. This is for patients and providers. They can call and talk to a lawyer almost immediately. We also are working on a equal rights ballot initiative. That is not a this year project. That is to amend the state constitution. This is a project that will take several years. We are hoping to enshrine reproductive health care and gender affirming care in an equal rights amendment to the state constitution. I will note, however, and there are lawyers in the room that know this better than I do, that there are more protected classes of people in the Connecticut state constitution than that are laid out in the federal constitution. So Connecticut is a place where if you have certain disabilities or just certain things going on in your life, that you are likely more legally protected than in many other states. Next would be our LGBTQIA rights work. This includes some litigation work that we are doing. We know that on day one, the president-elect will likely stomp on the rights of LGBTQIA people and especially transgendered people who are some of the most marginalized people in society. So there's just absolutely no reason to further bully them, but that's the MO of this person and their administration and Project 2025. And they do a good job in their misinformation ecosystems with demonizing these people. And we are fighting back with the most might that we have and in coalition with others that are like-minded. And we are hoping those easily editable statutes I talked about earlier that we've provided to the government or to our elected officials are most of them the edit that we're asking for is to include gender affirming care in the same protections that reproductive health care enjoys in Connecticut. We are trying to make it illegal, for example, for a red state or another state court to come after a family who is trying to provide gender affirming care to their minor child in this state, right? We call it the grandmother clause, so that like a grandmother from another state can't say like my grandchild is being abused because they are receiving gender affirming care that is likely life-saving. And then again, shoring up the marriage rights. We're hoping to be able to do that in a way that is enforceable by Connecticut court, which means if you are in a same-sex marriage or interracial marriage and you go to, for example, Florida, someone has a medical issue and they have some pretty nasty laws on the books. We are hopeful that we can shore these things up where a Connecticut judge can say, I'm sorry, these people are married in our state, and and that takes precedence over your terrible law. They're residents of our state. They just happen to be in your state, and so they are in fact married. Our Firewalls for Freedom work, that's what is included. And a lot of the conversations that we're having are educating people about gender affirming care, making sure people understand this is not a political football. This is clearly how people stay alive. And this is about the material conditions of people's lives. So next, ACLU Classic, the First Amendment, one of my favorites. We are hoping to protect the right to protest. We are doing some open records work. That's the rally that we are and the thing that we have, the motion that we have in state court tomorrow is an Open Records Act. We are doing some behind the scenes technical assistance and training of journalists on how to protect themselves and also freedom of information request. Government accountability and transparency, as you can imagine, is going to be very important in the next several years. And that part of the First Amendment is one that we are hoping to shore up, as well as the right to speak freely, assemble freely, protest, and even right to religious freedom. Also, we are anticipating another Muslim ban. We're anticipating some inflammatory rhetoric, and so that those are the things we're working on First Amendment wise in ACLU nationally and in Connecticut. We also have a free expression campaign. I think Logan will put a link to that in the chat. If you are an artist, a writer, a poet, a singer, anything, we are hosting some art on our website. So that in the case that in the coming months you feel the chill, that you can't freely express yourself, you can go to your local ACLU's website and see that there is in fact poetry and essays and murals and songs, and that we are hoping to not only fight for our rights, but bring joy to them. Very quickly, we're almost to the Q&A portion, I promise. This is our sort of proactive strategy. So the good thing about Connecticut, right, is we are a blue trifecta state, which is government and both state houses are blue, and we are surrounded by blue trifecta states. There is no more blue wall in this country, right? We are the blue coaster on the table of the United States. And because we are one of the only states, it's us and Rhode Island are the only states in the country completely surrounded by friends. We are taking it upon ourselves to meet this moment and make sure that not only do we hold the line on civil rights, model the good behavior of civil society, but also try to push the envelope forward in ways that we can. We do all of this through a racial justice lens and in comportment with our values, which are dignity, diversity, equity, inclusion, and centering the people who are most impacted in our work. And we are doing that. I'm sure you've noticed that the no excuse absentee voting measure has passed, and the ACLU was right there. Our 527E1 nonpartisan PAC was right there helping champion to get it through. And now we will be in the legislature working on implementation and making sure that that is enforced. We are continuing our calling card in Connecticut criminal legal system work. We are hoping to eliminate cash bail in the next several, again, not a this year thing, but in the next several years. There are some real equity issues with cash bail, a cash bail system, and we've seen it work in states like New Jersey, a whole-scale reform. So we're hoping to emulate that here in Connecticut. And if you don't know, this is a conversation for later, but if you don't know, it costs over $320 a day to be imprisoned in Connecticut. And when you come out of prison, much like a student loan or a hospital bill, you are responsible for that money. And what that does is functionally decimate as you know, in Connecticut, the racial proportions are functionally opposite in prison than they are in the state, right? So if it's 70% white, 30% non-white, it is 70% non-white, 30% white in jail. It is almost an inverse proportion, if not worse. So what that does is functionally decimate the ability of people to create, of marginalized communities to create generational wealth. Because people's estates can be forfeited, and the states can sort of take that money. And we are working on an education campaign so that everybody knows that pay to stay is extremely inequitable and really hurts the most vulnerable people in our society, and mostly Black and brown people. So we'll be working on that. You'll see some education pieces in the next several months coming out about that. Again, the government transparency and accountability work is very important, especially to our litigators. We are building out some subject matter expertise in artificial intelligence. We're working with the NAACP. We have a meeting with Senator Maroney tomorrow with the national and state NAACP to make sure that they are prioritizing decreasing bias in those large AI models, mostly for use in hiring models and things like that, where we continue to see racial inequities. And we are helping to draft that legislation, and we have some lawyers at National also that are helping, some colleagues there. And then, of course, once again, my favorite part of this, my job, is we are hoping to be an education and resource hub for reality-based information. We are trying to flood the zone with good information because, as you can tell, the zone is being flooded with bad information. And a lot of people in this country, there's a lot of problems in this country, but one of the biggest ones, I think, is that good people are getting conned into thinking that the populist message they're hearing is not predatory. And there is non-predatory populism, as we all know and love, but that is not what they are hearing in their ecosystems. And as much as we can, the ACLU of Connecticut is trying to push back against that. So now we will move to the issue of the day. Are there any questions so far? I can't see the chat, so if there's any questions, someone just say it out loud.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, great. We will move into immigration, and I want to talk about some things that we do know and some things that we don't know. And then I have a resource that we will share that will be updated actually tonight. Again, it was updated today. But Logan will share that out in the chat. We can share the Jill, that's the thing I sent you before the meeting. And we can talk about that specifically and what's included there. And then go into any questions you all have. So the first thing that we know is the federal government, the states, we are a sovereign state in the sovereign state of Connecticut. We get to decide how we treat each other and what our society looks like here in Connecticut. And we also, there are 50 sovereign states in this nation, and we are part of a federated United States. And so we have state government, right, and federal government. And the state government, we govern most of our lives. Immigration is one of the powers that we have ceded to the federal government. Interstate commerce is another one. Like there are things that make sense for the federal government to sort of regulate, and in good times, right, don't present as much of an equity issue as we are seeing now with immigration. So immigration is a federal, is under the remit of the federal government. However, we in Connecticut do not have to do the federal government's job for them, right? Like that's the beauty of federalism. So I would say that ICE and the federal government have quite a bit of power in this area. But how much power they actually do have in reality in Connecticut as things move forward remains to be seen. And will rely a lot on public pressure and advocacy from people like you, the ACLU and coalition partners. So first, if you go to our website, on the front page of the website, there's a Know Your Rights guide. It is actually I think it's in 12 languages, but English and Spanish are the first two. It's just, if you go to the website, it's right there on the left side. Immigrants' rights, it's a Know Your Rights thing. It links to ACLU National. So I wanted to make sure we had a Connecticut specific guidance, but that's a dynamic and living document that will be updated often. So I sent just an hour ago, Logan and Jill, the Immigrants' Rights and Resource Guide, which is a new publication, and the questions that you all submitted helped to guide some of that publication. So I appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to more good questions so that we can continue to build out that resource. And the thing I will tell you about immigration in the state of Connecticut, we had a question about this earlier, is that state and local police, we have a thing called the Trust Act. It is linked in the resource guide. It is, I would recommend you read it. It is only 8 pages, and it covers what state law enforcement can and cannot do in immigration. It was enacted in 2012, 2013, and has been amended in 2018 and 2019. We at the ACLU are working on some measures to continue to strengthen that Trust Act. There's a few things that we would like, especially on the data privacy front. That's going to be something you'll see more and more guidance and more need for public pressure that the ACLU will be asking you to do in the coming months, is on the data privacy front for immigration, reproductive health, healthcare generally. But state and local police cannot detain people for ICE. There is certain data they can't share with ICE. They cannot allow ICE to speak to someone that's in custody. But ICE does have the right to be in most public places. And we would expect across the country that you will see them there. I think part of the point is this culture of fear they're trying to instill in folks. So they want to look very, very visible. So our advocacy work, we're hoping to strengthen some of the Trust Act, especially on the data privacy front. And also I think they have to report every 6 months, like what they've shared with ICE and it goes, it's state and local police, but I think it goes to OPM. Anyway, we're trying to strengthen some of that and make that a little more transparent, so that our governments are accountable to us. So that is sort of the overview of immigration. We have this other document that once I stop sharing my PowerPoint, I will get to. Um, so yes, that's our overview of immigration from a firewalls for freedom perspective. We will go into specific things that you all can do in your communities when we look at that resource guide here in a moment. The other thing before I stop and listen to all of you for a while, the other thing that I certainly want to make sure that you know is that we are in this fight with you and we need you to get involved. Being in this meeting is a great start. This is the first of many meetings. I will pop on a Zoom at any time and update you with information and answer questions, and so will my colleagues. We need you to stay engaged and informed. We need you to support one another and maybe volunteer with our partner organizations. We are working on a volunteer sort of cascade right now, but we are taking the lead from our coalition partners there on what is needed. We will need you in the streets, right? We will also need you to be calling. Public pressure is huge. Public pressure is a thing that governments are almost required to respond to. And we will need you to be applying that public pressure, phone calls, emails, humanizing yourself, getting to know your local elected officials, and humanizing them. And I would be remiss, Logan would sign me off the Zoom if I didn't remind you to become a member, and to make sure that you are a card-carrying member of the ACLU, and to make sure that you get in touch with our philanthropy department if you'd like to host a home gathering where we do some of these talks and go more in depth about these things, or if you'd like to join the Impact Society with a significant gift of I think it's like an over $1,000 gift. So that is my sort of ACLU pitch. And now I will stop sharing my screen so I can see all of your lovely faces and hope that you're not bored to death. But we will start, I think, by maybe looking at that resource guide, or if you have specific questions, we can go from there.
Yeah, this is Jill. I just want to thank you. That's a, huge, you guys are doing a lot on issues I think that we all really care about. And as you said, you did send this resource, Immigrants' Rights and Resource Guide, that I think I've read through, and I think it's really helpful. A lot of us in our last couple of meetings came up with some questions that we had that we didn't understand in Connecticut law. And I think it might be, just to kind of run through a few of the questions would be helpful. So, like the first one was, what are you anticipating actually happening on January 20th? And, just to kind of go down your list, you do attempt for the federal government to try to eliminate the birthright citizenship and to denaturalize American citizens.
Yes, that's a direct quote from Trump and the campaign, and we are to the point where we have to take these people at their word. They gave us a 900-page document that we unfortunately think that they're very serious about.
Right. They want to reinstitute the Muslim ban, further restrictions placed on asylum, eliminate the protections for those, the DACA and the TPS, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals and Temporary Protected Status.
And now that one might not be day one. That would likely, we're thinking maybe more like March, but you'll hear a lot of, the whole point is to create this culture of fear. But that one, I think the training I had this morning or this afternoon pushed that date back to about March. That's appropriation season is in March, so that's when a lot of the funding stuff will get ugly.
I see. And that what's interesting about that is that for both of those programs, the federal government has detailed information about every single person who's part of those programs. So that's why the people who are actually currently protected here working to get citizenship status can be some of the most vulnerable people. So it's
that's correct.
Really terrible.
Yes, people that have chosen this country and chosen to come be part of us. And I think, don't quote me on this, I think there's about 800,000 DACA folks that are at risk, and I think 200. I know the temporary protective status, they're going to start with El Salvador. There's like a time limited thing in El Salvador, and it's like 225,000 people. And let me make sure that's right. I have my notes.
Okay.
Yeah, 250,000 El Salvador TPS folks would be first on that chopping block. And that's first.
And that's federal, right? Not just in our
Yes,
state,
yes,
right?
that's correct. That's correct.
Okay. Um, so one of the things they're going to try to do is undermine the protections for unaccompanied minors and families. And there's a really good advice here that I didn't know, that residents can go to your local probate court and bring our immigrant friends there, and they can get temporary guardianship for their children and make a plan so that if someone is actually detained and their children, there's a bunch of protections that they can have, that they can do through our local probate court.
So let me tell you quickly on that. We can talk more about that. I think there's some lawyers in the room that may know more about it than I, but so this is not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. Unfortunately, one of my many faults is I am not a lawyer, but the probate court judge in Danbury I had a talk with today. And he said, I cannot give policy guidance. That is not the remit of my job. But what I can do is say that residents in Danbury, which is where I think we have our largest immigrant population in Danbury in the state, if not one of the largest, residents in Danbury at the very least, and I would hope this would be replicated statewide, should not feel threatened going into their probate court. They should not feel like they are going to be like surveilled or on some list or something if they go. And what they can do when they are there is if they anticipate having to leave the country or God forbid be deported or taken to a mass detention camp or something, and their children would be without a parent, they can make sure that that they get the forms that they would need. The other thing is, and the clerks at the probate court, again, they cannot give legal advice or policy guidance, but what they can do is provide you with a slate of forms that shore up certain rights that you have to your family, your property, power of attorney, things like this. And there is let me say this gently, there is a potential argument that lawyers might like to see, right? That would be advantageous to someone's immigration status. That like if you've been trying in good faith to go get these forms and do these things, and you're not just completely caught off guard, right? That sort of shows a pattern of behavior that might be advantageous to one's immigration status, is I think the most gentle way I could say that.
And just some things, a lot of us talked about, what should we be at somebody's house if we think ICE might come there and physically put my body between ICE and an immigrant neighbor? And, perhaps bearing witness and being able to locate resources for those people is powerful, but you would be breaking the law. And that is kind of a personal choice.
What I can tell you, yes, officially from the ACLU, what I can tell you is that we here work within the bounds of the Constitution, and you cannot expect constitutional protections if you are in fact breaking the law. And that is all I will say about that. I will also say, apropos of nothing, one of the things that you in racial justice training and an anti-racist training, putting yourself as if for the white people in the room, putting yourself, whether that's your body, your resources, your brain, your money, anything, putting yourself between people of color, the most marginalized people in our society, and the problem, whatever problem you think that is a good way to sort of think about that, right? But yes, barring the door of someone's home, I think, in my personal opinion, right, would lend chaos to a scene where order and calm would actually be the more advantageous for their ability to stay in this country. That would be what I would say. But I mean, I think, again, write down your values, know what you will and won't put up with. But sort of the elegance, that balance there of knowing your rights and also making sure that you're bearing witness to history is a real thing.
I'll just finish up with one thing and then I'll be quiet and let other people ask questions. But so let's say that situation happens. You are at the home of a good friend of yours and ICE comes knocking on the door. they've listed in this resource guide really helpful information that you only have to open the door for ICE if they have a warrant signed by a judge or magistrate. If they have just a warrant of removal or deportation, which they explain what that is not enough to enter a home without consent. If they only have an arrest warrant, that is not enough to allow them to enter a home without consent. But so what you try to do is tell them, if you have a warrant signed by a judge, slide it under the door. And that warrant must have the individual's name, who they are looking for. And the judge or magistrate has to have signed it. And basically those two protections are such that it's supposed to be, this is somebody who is believed to have broken the law, or there is something where they believe this person could be immediately deported. That's, different than, it seems to me, than somebody just dropped a dime on somebody and they come in with an arrest warrant, but they haven't followed the legal process. So you can help people know that they don't have to open the door in that space.
So one of the things I'll mention from the ACLU is one of the reasons that we are able to be effective in a lot of our immigration litigation advocacy on the national level is because when these raids are executed, when we saw them executed like in Georgia and Texas in 2016, which was under Obama, by the way, I would urge you to click on, in that resource guide, the Brookings Institution link. It's embedded somewhere in there. There is a graph that shows how many people were deported under which presidents. And it's an interesting thing to look at. But what I will say is during those raids in 2016, one of the reasons the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center and folks were able to be very effective in those spaces was because ICE used ruses to get into people's homes. They said that they were police and said, that there had been someone in their home. They basically lied to these people. And they did things that were outside of the Constitution. So the raids themselves were unconstitutional and people were able to be reunited with their families. It took, a long time of FOIA work and some really dedicated legal advocates there. But that is one of the things you should expect, is that ICE is not they do not feel particularly beholden to the rules. And the other thing I will note with a warrant is, if anything is misspelled on that warrant, it sure is not valid. So I would make sure to triple, quadruple check that spelling, because when they are executing these warrants quickly and with extreme prejudice, they don't always throw it in a spell check. So
yeah, interesting. And I think what you're saying also is just so the idea of being there and bearing witness is really powerful. Even if you can't stop what's happening,
correct.
At least you have an actual witness to something that's going on that maybe can be challenged later.
Very correct.
And the last thing I'll say is just immigration, like you said, ICE is able to go to public spaces, like the public space of a restaurant, and have their presence known, but they are not allowed to go into the private spaces like the kitchen to pull people out.
And we will have guidance. I think one of our fellow affiliates, Tennessee, maybe, someone has guidance for business owners and restaurant workers. We are working on making sure that is Connecticut specific. So we don't want to give out any information that's not usable here in the state. But that rings true at this time, is what I can say. These are all living dynamic documents and situations. But yes, the other thing I will note is we are working with the food assistants, the folks that work in food banks, and with faith leaders. And if you have any folks in those spaces or in other similar spaces that want to have some of these conversations, we'd love to bring them in.
Great. Yeah, we have 3 big food banks around here that are doing that. So who else has questions? Just unmute yourself and please ask.
I hope this was helpful at all. I hope.
Oh, it's very helpful.
And I hope you all are looking at the
document.
Take in. It's a lot. I know it's a lot. I hope you all are looking at the document. And if you're not, we will email it out after this meeting. And it literally will be updated also, once again, I think before the holidays as well. One of our lawyers had a couple of things to add. But it's right now, it's a great document.
This is Roberta Whitty. I have a question. I work with refugees, and one of our families is not yet, they don't have their green card yet. So, do those people fall within this deportation process as well?
So very likely, and they should assume yes. I don't
Really?
know, I don't know the exact answer to that. We're working with Iris on some of
Yes.
that, and they're yeah,
Yeah,
they're gonna they're
that's who we work through.
oh
Yeah.
great, great. So they're providing us some guidance here in the next few weeks on that. But what we do
Okay.
know is that um, you know, although we are members of civil society that comport ourselves to democratic norms, or whatever, there are times when the government has significant overreach, and we should expect that in this time, right? So we should not expect good faith actions on the part of these people. And so if there is any reason that they could target those folks, and that is what that day one, I don't, and again, we are assuming it's going to be day one because we have to be ready. But the further restrictions on asylum also has to do with refugees. Hold on. There is a bill. It is one of those omnibus like $85 billion bills that I think it did not. It it's I don't know if it passed the House on party line or didn't pass, but it's going to be taken up again in the House in Congress here, not in Connecticut, in United States Congress here in the next few months. And there are some fairly tough things for those seeking asylum and for refugees that will make it tougher for them to participate in society.
So, if they've
If
already
it
applied for
passes.
their green card, are they
I,
still in?
I would assume the worst is what I will tell you at this
Okay.
point.
And what about, can they go into schools? I don't know if you said this.
Right now, as of right now,
Yeah.
the Connecticut government and multiple municipal governments in Connecticut
Mhm.
are, the guidance there is for people to send their children to schools. And we certainly at the ACLU Connecticut want children to be in schools, and want children to feel safe in schools and want families to feel safe, picking up and dropping off their children from schools.
Mhm.
So right now, the guidance is, for folks to go ahead and take their kids to school.
But can ICE go into the schools? That was my question. Sorry, I wasn't clear.
No, it's okay. That I don't know specifically. The
Okay,
issue there is that a public school is not private property.
I
So,
see.
right. And ICE, and the ICE has quite a bit of leeway in
Mhm.
public spaces.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Hi,
And I will tell you, Roberta, when I have a exact answer to that question, it will be in this document. We will update you. I mean, like that is
Okay. Yeah,
yeah.
I'll reach out to Dot at Iris because we were originally told that they have nothing to worry about.
That's what we are also being told, that we're the ACLU.
Mhm.
We have to triple check everything and make sure it passes
Mhm.
our muster before I
Mhm.
put in official guidance. But I mean, we want kids to go to schools and we want families to feel safe,
Right.
educating their children. So
Okay. Thanks.
hi.
okay.
Christine
This
had a
is,
Hold on.
question.
oh yeah.
Sorry.
Um,
Okay. Christine,
this
then
might,
Barbara.
this might be a silly question, but if English is not your first language and you're served documents that are in English and you can't read English or necessarily speak English, what are you supposed to do?
Not sign them.
But so are you not, so you just reject all the documents,
You
even if it's even if
yeah.
it's a legitimate warrant?
You can say, I can't read English and I need to talk to a lawyer. You can continually ask if you're under arrest. There are some things you can do in that document that the last couple of pages have some guidance there. But yes, the thing that you do is not give out any information, not sign anything. And in 2016, for example, folks that did not speak English were taken out of their homes and they were taken to detention centers, but they were not deported, whereas other people were because they knew their rights. And they didn't speak, at all, and they were able to be reunited with their families. Of course, after a lot of trauma, and some time in the what's it called? It's a detention facility in South Texas, but that is one of the ways to put yourself at an advantage, is just not to talk to people, not to sign anything. So And
The one thing
I do think some of those words, I think they designed them to be in two languages.
Yeah,
Thank you.
let me just say though, before Barbara speaks, that the one thing that everyone has to do is if they ask for your name, you have to give them your name. But you don't, everything else you can say, I don't have to speak to you.
That's
Can
right.
you?
And in Connecticut, before you give them your name, you have the right to ask, am I under arrest? Because that can change. But yes, in Connecticut, you do have to give them your name. But again, you can always delay, mitigate, go slow, that sort of thing. They want you to
Don't
move
give a
fast.
false, but don't give a false name. Don't give
Correct.
any false information.
That is
Just
correct.
give them your name and say you can't speak anymore. You need to speak to a lawyer. Are you being detained?
Uh, so, Jill, this is a minute then for you. Are you going to, or are you going to organize this resource guide with sort of point by point so we can give it out shorthanded?
Yes.
I mean, okay.
Yes, B has done that. It's really, I mean, she basically literally did it after being at the Stanberry meeting. So it's all coming
Fabulous.
together right
Okay.
away. So
Okay.
yeah, it's very well organized and we'll get it. And then she's going to be constantly updating it. So we will stay in touch with as new information comes in, we'll find a way to give it to the group in an organized way.
My second question, though, is I have an email list of about 250 people that from leftover Trump, well, not even leftover, and what with Trump's, trying to target people, should one send it by email, something like that, or how can one protect one's, not just oneself, but anybody else on the email list?
Here's my thought, Barbara, that I feel like there's a special session we need to do with either somebody at the ACLU or elsewhere. What is a secure communications practice? What are
Great.
people doing? I think sharing these kinds of resources like the ACLU resource guide with your email list, there's nothing illegal about that. It's when we start to get to planning actions or anybody's name or identifiable information being shared. That's what should not be shared in any kind of emails or texts. And if it comes to that, we need to we need to come up with what will be our secure way to communicate sensitive
I
information.
actually wasn't, I mean, I could completely agree with you. I wasn't thinking so much that they're going to knock on my door because I did blah, 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 but that it's the accumulation of names, whether or not involved. So I see your point. I mean, I agree with you. I see your point. But nonetheless, now I feel like everything is up for grabs in terms of being literally grabbed.
Right. Well, I guess what I would say for our group, I had talked to Sophia and John Carter and Lee last week, and they couldn't be on the call today, but they'll listen to the recording. I think one of the next things I want to do is send an email to everybody. I've been blind CCing everybody. To just say, do you want to stay on the list? And are you okay with sharing your name so that other people know who's on the list or not? And that will be a choice that people can make. But of course, if I get, I don't know, if somebody comes with a warrant for my computer, I have been sending emails to a lot of people and people's names and email addresses are on that.
You know what? That's when you go into the bathroom, turn on the tub, say, I have to use the bathroom, take your computer and stick it in the bathtub with water running on it.
The other thing I tell people, especially people that do enjoy some type of privilege, like most of us on this call, we've all been doing this a long time. Like it's not that we're like on a list, right? But like there is years of data. Like if you stop today, they're not going to go, oh, this person just started caring much more about what their dogs and buying sweaters for their dogs, then if you are a person that has been involved in this work for a long time, that like that is a behavior pattern that is noticeable, right? But I do agree with like the lists issue or whatever. I personally use as a former journalist and a DC person, I use Signal quite a bit. It's an app, it's a messaging app that's end-to-end encrypted. It's funded by a nonprofit foundation. And nothing is perfect. Absolutely nothing is perfect. You should never assume that. I assume that every text message I send will go on the front page of the New York Times. And everybody would be very bored with them, but I just have to assume that, in the line of work that we're in. But some of those measures are sort of appropriate. And I just think asking people, the thing that I would do is think about the people for whom the country, it is still arguably a free country, but not for everyone, right? So think about those people, and make sure to make the most insulating that you would do would be to protect those people. I like to have a lot of conversations in person. I go to church basements and train people on how to call their legislators. It's not anything radical, it's not anything crazy, but like doing conversations in person is a really good practice. And especially if you're dealing with marginalized folks, that is often a good way to get in touch. And then, you can always leave your cell phone in the car or at home, or, whatever, if you're sort of, if you've watched, what is it? All the President's Men 50 times in the past 10 years, like the rest of us, like, if there's anything that gives you cause for pause, just take a pause. The whole point is to scare you into feeling like you can't talk, that you can't communicate, that you can't do these things. And humans have a really good way of figuring out how to do that, regardless of who's telling them that they can and can't.
This might be a good time too to you've hit on it a little bit, but really talk through the data privacy side of things, because I think a lot of folks don't understand like the importance of that, right? Like there's lists out there that the Connecticut state government has on Husky for immigrants, like a list of everybody that's on that healthcare list. And there's all these kinds of lists out there that they're probably going to go after more than our list. And can you talk a little bit about that, like data privacy work?
Sure. That is the question that in affected communities we get the most. Today in Danbury, the American Dream folks said, the American Dream is American Dream Coalition, said that of the 637 calls that they'd had, like 2/3 of them are about what's happening with my data, with my Medicare and things like my Medicaid and things like that. And so what happens is governments and healthcare providers and whatever, they keep files, and files are now all electronic. And they're as we are working at the ACLU on making sure with AI, with reproductive health care and whatever, that laws are written that say how long you can keep that data, where that data is stored, who has access to it, who can buy or sell it. Like if we store it on a cloud service, there may be something in the terms and conditions of that cloud service that they can sell our data without us knowing it, right? And making sure that the government knows exactly what's going on with their data and is able to keep it, and especially now, like is able to keep it in Connecticut, right? Because extremist actors are in red states are trying to buy up data that's on the healthcare exchanges and things like that. And we are really working, that's what the enforcement of some of these shield laws are, the data privacy work, and some of the AI work is doing exactly that. There is, I'm not probably techie enough to go into it, but there is a cascade of whenever you type something in to an Excel spreadsheet, for example, right? Like there is a cascade of things on the back end of ones and zeros that exists because you typed that thing in. And that is what extremists, they can buy that and decrypt it or whatever, read it, or sometimes they can just buy the actual documents, right? And be able to have access to that. And it's not just, and unfortunately, sometimes the extremists are elected officials in other states. I'm from Texas. Like Ken Paxton is a bad dude that wants a lot of information about people that look a whole lot like me in Texas, that are of reproductive age. And, and so we at the ACLU nationally and especially in Connecticut are working very hard to make sure that the legislation is written in this way and that we're providing that guidance and explaining why. And we've gone back and forth. Senator Maroney is one of the best data privacy champions we have in the state. And there's things that he was not even abreast of. That's why we're having this meeting with the NAACP and him tomorrow. As there was some bias measures that, he didn't think were prudent, and they have to do with how long data is stored and who has access to it.
Anything else, Barbara?
No.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that has come up for us is that a lot of the immigrants who work in our towns live in New York State, or they live in Massachusetts, or vice versa. And I just wonder, we've gone to a couple of events in New York State. They have a lot of protections and the groups that are trying to protect people. But what would you say? How do you create coalitions across state lines where the state laws are different and we
Well,
have
I'll tell you, Jill, you sent me that email and I got on the horn to the ACLU of Massachusetts about
Okay.
30 minutes after you sent that email.
Okay.
I'm going up there January 3rd to file share with our comms folks and to meet their immigration lawyers. They have they have a much bigger staff than we do. We are small but mighty, and quite mighty in Connecticut. But in Massachusetts, much like everything else, sports teams and everything else, they've got more than we do. And they have two lawyers that are working just on immigration issues, and I'm going to get a direct answer to that question on January
great.
3rd. The other thing I will tell you is what would be best for those people, right, is to make sure they know the laws in both states and that they have contacts in both states, and things like that. And what I will also tell you is, much like the abortion hotline, we work with the Attorney General and with law firms in Massachusetts all the time. Our legal team is on the phone to Massachusetts lawyers, I mean, near daily. And so we do have some good lines of communication there, and I'm hoping to build out some of the on the ground coalition. I mean, this is Connecticut Students for a Dream, Iris, folks like that. I mean, we're all at this point trying to do this together. We're trying to standardize our language, and we're meeting in several different iterations of committees and things. It's been really nice to see the folks in the state come together so quickly, in an organized way. And we're really hoping to be able to lift up coalition partners for that as well. But I'm on the way.
Well, I'm so thrilled that you're doing that. So thank you
Yeah,
very
I mean,
much.
about 30 minutes after your email, I said, you know what? I do need to make that phone call. Now, in New York State, we will talk with them as well, but they have an immigrant defense fund that is state funded. So does New Jersey. It only really covers about half of immigrants that need legal services, but they have some more protections. So my first stop is Massachusetts.
Okay, great. Phyllis, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to ask a question?
Yes, I'm more interested in New York State because I know a lot of people over there, a lot of immigrants without, the right papers. So what do you suggest for them?
I would suggest the same. I would suggest that they go to the ACLU. There's one in New York State and New York City. There's also the National ACLU has links to those. I would want them to go to learn their rights, to know their rights. And I would want them to make sure there's a lot of, and if you need some New York specific ones, I can get Phyllis, if you'll make sure Jill has your info, we can send you some things. But there are a lot of there's like listservs for like all of New England that have, public defense lawyers and like immigrant defense lawyers and things. So, if you ask a lawyer or an advocate in one state, in this area of the country, we can usually, if we don't know the answer or don't know the person, we can find the person that does. But they have, because of their size and because of New York City, they're quite organized, and have, they have good networks there. And a lot of those networks bleed into Fairfield County, to be honest with you. So it's good for us.
Well, that wonderful book you talked about, or booklet, the resource guide, does that work for New York State as well?
It is Connecticut specific at this time, but we will be doing there will be a national training for immigrants know your rights from the ACLU. Don't know. I would, I'd imagine sometime before February or March. And that will be a training much like the one they did in 2017 in Miami, but we will also be able to go into state specific breakout rooms with comms folks and policy folks and lawyers, to that people can get questions. So that's the ACLU answer. But
I'm gonna just turn. Angelina has unmuted, and I know that she's been speaking to the Northeast Community Center in New York, so she may know. I don't know, Angelina, did you want to say something about that?
Well, no, I just, because of that and because of what you're just saying now, B, I feel like this is a particularly interesting area. Does that mean that immigrants need to know the rights if they're living in one state and working in another, and there's an ICE raid, that like there's three different, sets of rules that might be in place. Like, is there, I'm just looking through your documents. Are there documents that are written in Spanish that will help people navigate these, the different rules in different places? What might be said to them, how tense that might get, like that they might just
Yeah.
have the language,
So the front page of our website links to the Know Your Rights from the ACLU National that has the sort of national guidance. It
Mhm.
doesn't go state by state, but it is in English, Spanish, and like I think 10 other like languages.
Mhm.
That is the best we have at this moment, but these documents are being developed like all over in Connecticut. Thanks to Jill, we got a little bit of a head start. So, but these documents are being developed everywhere, and so we will hopefully be able to like share those out. And one of the things we're putting a primacy on is information sharing for sure.
And I guess
But I hate that the labor goes on to the person, the immigrant, but like they should know, they should at least know that they need to know what can happen in any state that they're in. Now, the policy guidance that we have given to our elected officials, one of the things we're trying to do is shore up rights so that people in Connecticut, no matter where you are in the country, have the rights of people in Connecticut. And that includes immigration. One of the things that one of the guidance that we are working on is trying to take away, if you get a driver's license that is not a real ID in Connecticut, you have to indicate your status. And we're trying to get rid of that checkbox. That's one of the statute guidance we have from our legal director that we've provided to elected officials is trying to get rid of that checkbox so that people don't have to indicate their status. And then that driver's license is valid in 50 states. So that's the sort of those are small things, but those are the sorts of things that we can do.
that's great. I'm gonna let Molly or Frank, you've unmuted if you want to ask a question. I just want to say that at some point, what would be very helpful to me is that there are so many different statuses. It would be great to know if anybody knows where there's like a list of all of the things, if you're not a US citizen, but you're in this country either legally or illegally, or you don't have your documentation yet. What are all the different status levels? That would be very helpful.
Iris has that for refugees and I think asylum seekers. I've seen it on uh,
Okay.
Maggie's given it to me on a PowerPoint before, but
Because
yeah, but there's like citizens, residents, T visas, all the things. Let me see if I can find something that I can put in the chat.
Because I'd like to start asking a few people I know. I want to find a way to sensitively say, what's your status? Sensitively ask that question so that then they say what their status is, because everybody knows it. If you're an immigrant in this country, you know what your status is, right?
You should.
Then I would want to be able to understand sort of what level of, just internally myself, what level of threat they're under right immediately and what kind of protection I can help them get. And I just don't know that information.
And you should also be mindful that some people may not want to tell you
Yes.
the status, and that's okay. So this is why we're trying to have documents for like all the different ones. But I found one at the Migration Policy Institute. Let me get it for you.
Okay. Frank or Molly, did you guys want to ask something?
Yeah, it just occurred to me, does it make sense for us and others like us to be creating a map that we regularly, I mean, literally weekly, send in, or that we get the information to create a map of all the places where ICE has been showing up? And so each week that map would get updated. It would just simply be people reporting to a central resource, say, you guys or somewhere else, where they've been cited, and, submitting it to our newspaper as useful information. And also for citizen awareness for those who aren't on our side of the fence, for them to see the far-reaching aspect of what ICE is doing. Just is that allowable information for us to be sharing via our newspaper or some other venue?
Yeah, I mean, yes, that is. What I would do is report it to a place like the ACLU. And I'm sure the Southern Poverty Law Center is tracking it. I know the ACLU tracks it internally. But if it is helpful, I think that, that is a fine thing to do. I also think that, um, you know, in the event we have ICE raids, like it will be in all of the papers, and it will be like, it will be news. And so that would be something that would, I think people, yes, people would keep that somewhere.
Um, what kind of social media would you follow for that? I remember the last time this was happening, I was living in New York City, and I mean, you couldn't open your phone without like getting updates on that kind of stuff on I think Instagram or something like that. If you're following local news organizations.
Yeah, I mean, we follow all of the local news folks, and then we try to put out our own sort of information and resources as well, like on us. I don't, has there been anything else that's very helpful to others? I would hope you follow ACLU and ACLU-CT. We're on every social media, much to my chagrin. We're on every social media possible. But we follow all of the local and state news, and keep abreast of it. But remember, journalism is not what it used to be. So a lot of this is word of mouth and getting things reported, which is why we work in these coalitions.
All right, I'm mindful that it is 5:22, so we have maybe another 5 minutes for questions, unless B, you or Logan had something you wanted to talk about to kind of wrap up.
Well, what would be the most helpful? What has been helpful and what would be the most helpful?
Well, I think if somebody has another question, I think that's helpful. I think everybody on this call and myself will want to read what you've pulled together, the Immigrant Rights and Resource Guide, and maybe we have more questions after that. And perhaps we can, organize those and send them to you as continuing guides for things that people want to know about. I'll just say another question for me is, we live in small towns up here. And so getting to know your elected officials, all of us know our elected officials, and yet there's very little a first selectman in a town like Sharon that doesn't even have a police officer. There's kind of very little, I think, that a first selectman could do.
So
But
I will say there
a
is
little different than the city of Danvers. It's
in
very
the
different than
immigrant community, which I'm not speaking for. I'm sort of relating what I know there is people are of two minds. One of them is, don't draw attention to us, don't point us out. The more you do that, the more vulnerable we are. There is another very vocal group that wants people like mayors, selectmen, aldermen, anybody that, lunch ladies, bus driver, anybody that will, to say, like, if you're trying to get to our immigrant population, you have to go through me first. And I've seen both of those sentiments. We welcome both of them at the ACLU. I think they come from different places, and they both sort of make sense when you think about them. So I would say making sure that you just have these conversations with those people, and see where they are. And just make sure that you're continuing to have these conversations. Like, this is the part about writing down your values and what you will and won't put up with, right? Just making, and like, have that conversation with your selectmen. Say, like, I have the following 5 values. This literally is how we do the work at the ACLU. We say, here are our 6 values. Here are the action items that we are recommending on behalf of those values. Ours are, wonky policy stuff and litigation, but it can literally just be like, hey, so where are you on this issue? And what's going to happen if someone, like, what, talk this out with me. Like, what's going to happen if someone, we've been having these group conversations about what happens if ICE comes to our small town, and comes after, the 5 people here that are vulnerable. What are you planning on doing? And here's where I'm holding myself accountable. What are you planning to do? And how can we hold you accountable to that? And just listening, and then at that point as well, you know, they may not have the same threshold for some of this as you all do, but that is why we have these conversations. I mean, it is literally from the book on tyranny, written by a Yale professor, and you know, but it's literally from the book to make sure that you're doing that and having these conversations. Very old school. It seems like it doesn't matter, but it really does matter. I mean, Logan and I do this in our personal lives and our professional lives, and it makes a difference.
So I want to give it looks like Malia has
Yeah.
unmuted. Before we do that, there's one thing I want to say is that what of course, like my job is to raise money for the ACLU, right? Like, and then we've done our strategic plan. We have over 4 years. The 4 years that we have during the Trump administration, the ACLU alone, from folks in Connecticut, has about a $4 million gap of funding that we have to be able to find. But that's not the ACLU, just the ACLU, right? That's all these immigrant rights groups that we're talking about. That's Planned Parenthood of Southern Connecticut. That's Equality Connecticut, right? That's all of our partners, right? We are all part of the resistance, and the resistance is not well funded. Like, all of our organizations do not have the funding and the resources to do the work that we need to do. So think about the causes that you care about most and think about funding those to the best of your ability. I hope that includes the ACLU, but I also hope that you think beyond just organizations like ours. And then, is it Malia? Did I say that right?
Yeah. So I know that I've heard that about breaking families up. And I know that some people have legal children and are illegal, not documented themselves. And do resources vary based on that? I know you talked about, and I missed a really decent portion of this, unfortunately. But I know you mentioned school and like just to keep like going to, hopefully people feel safe continuing to send their kids to school, but the risk there because it's public property. But are there different resources for parents with documented children who are undocumented themselves?
That is the guidance about going to the probate court. So when folks are not documented and they have, and that is the issue with birthright citizenship. I mean, if you can imagine that a president of the United States wants to strip citizenship from people that were born in this country, I mean, it is hard to fathom. This is why I'm very glad you all are here today. But that is exactly where those sort of weird administrative, we don't think about them often, things like you have to go to the probate court and make sure that you have all documents in order so that in the case that you are separated from your family, that your family not only has resources, but the rest of your family can stay together while you are hopefully very, very swiftly coming back home. I mean, like that's the hope. That's the best case scenario for those situations. But that is why people need to have those guardianship documents and make sure that they have, the one thing that I would tell people that are immigrants, whether they're documented or not, between now and inauguration, whatever you need to do, do it. You need to sign a lease, go sign a lease. You need to get a copy of your kids' birth certificates, get the copy. It costs $100 and takes 3 weeks. You better do it. Like those kinds of things that you need to make sure that people have. And if you can get them in, several copies and, keep them in a safe place and make sure you have them at all times. And then if you are an undocumented person or even, whether you have some different status, right? Make sure you have your papers with you, any papers that you do have, including Connecticut driver's license, because you can be undocumented and have that. Make sure you have those with you at all times.
Yeah. And in this resource guide, you do have a list of the documents they should have.
Yes.
So
yes.
that you'll get that.
Yeah. The last thing I will say, I can take some more questions if we have any more, but the last thing I will say is you all look like a very smart and thoughtful group of folks. So I want to impart something to you that is really keeping me going. I'm not a Connecticut native either, so this gives me a lot of hope in Connecticut. But after the Civil War, when President Lincoln was reuniting the country, he looked to exactly this area, to Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, exactly the area that we are in, and like exactly the makeup that we have for a replicable model of these United States, of how people were supposed to act, the kind of statutes that they needed to have, the kind of civic society and social safety nets. All of those things came from this soil, this area of the country where our friends are now facing a lot of fear and a lot of potential trouble. And I just, that really holds me and keeps, like, that helps me hold the center when I worry about these things, is that not only have we seen this before in lots of different iterations, but also that there is a history here of people taking care of themselves and of their neighbors and of each other. And I also remind everyone that the state motto is "He who transplants sustains." Right? And so we are so clearly a state that should be taking care of our people, and especially those that have come from far away to join us in our society. So that, I hope that gives you a little bit of hope, and I hope that the ACLU does as well. We certainly work hard to make sure that our message gets out there, and that we're available to folks like you.
Thank you. We have a proud tradition that we have to uphold.
Yeah.
Even if the rest of the country is going to hell. So we will try to do that.
That is correct.
With this group of
Thank
people.
you so much.
Thank you so much. This was really helpful. And it's a great start, and we will do our best to keep communication going when we have more questions to send them that help shape what you guys are doing. And
please do. And we can hop on a Zoom at any time. We can hop on with some updates, or I can send something over. This is, it really is the joy of my life to get to see people that care about this work. So
thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. We'll see you all soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.